we've gone live, so if you want to...
Oh, we've gone live?
Yes, we've gone live.
All right, so first I wanted to thank everybody in attendance and those of you watching on the live stream. This is the third year, I believe. We had a COVID year. I think we started this in 2019, having presenters come in and having a night where parents in the community and students could come and listen to receive some information on vaping, the dangers, and I think the biggest thing is to provide parents with a conversation on how to help their children. Not just, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, but we know the kids are doing it. How can we help them? Because it is a habit, it's an addiction. For me personally, this hits home. My parents are tobacco users, or smokers. They've been smoking since they were in high school. You know, back in the day when you could, probably like here in Northwood, that teachers were smoking outside with the students, and we didn't know the long-term effects. And I see them every day now that they moved to North Carolina, and it pains me to watch the long-term health effects that they're dealing with now. And I just think, what if their teachers, what if they had some information, what if someone had a conversation with them when they were in high school? Would they be in this position now? We'll never know, but I'm looking at my parents, and I don't want our kids to end up like that one day. So again, thank you all for coming. With us tonight, I don't know what order we want to go in, but with us tonight is Natalie Thompson. She's the Regional Tobacco Prevention Manager. And we also have Mr. Rob Schooley with Chatham County Schools. He's our health and physical education and wellness instructor, as well as our program facilitator with the district. So I want to thank both of you for coming out and taking the time out of your busy night. And I hope that the parents who are here, parents on the live stream, parents watching at home, if you have any questions, feel free, I think, to reach out to Natalie and Rob. I don't know if I can really help you a lot, but I will try and find answers if you have questions moving forward. But I hope this night is beneficial to everyone watching, everyone in attendance. And thank you both for coming. And who would like to go first? Natalie? And I give it to Natalie. Thank you, Natalie.
So I advance on the computer here.
Yeah.
All right, y'all, thanks for having me tonight. I'm excited to be here. I'm Natalie Thompson, and I'm a regional tobacco manager. And what that actually means is that I cover 8 different counties in North Carolina, including Chatham County, and I try to support programs, tobacco education programs, tobacco treatment programs, as well as tobacco-free policies in all of the counties that I cover. I do not provide any direct service, so that means that I cannot help your child, you know, one-on-one get off vaping. I don't actually do classes or counsel people. It's more of a policy role that I have of trying to help school systems, health facilities, really provide care to folks who struggle with tobacco use and do that through policies and changes. So I just wanted to give that little caveat there. And I want to ask you all something first. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I want you to give me a number here, with 1 being not at all confident and 10 being I feel super confident. How confident do you feel talking to young people about e-cigarettes or vaping? 1, not confident. Give me some numbers. 5? Okay, we got a lot of middle of the road folks.
Just based on experience and history with my parents and, you know, tapping into what they know and why they're using it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So got some middle of the road folks. We'll check in at the end of the presentation just to see where y'all are at then. Okay, so you all probably don't need this slide to know this, but e-cigarettes have kind of taken over as far as the most popular tobacco product used by young people. It used to be cigarettes back when I was coming up in the 80s and 90s, but e-cigarettes have kind of taken over that place as we've watched other tobacco product use go down among young people. So you can see here that e-cigarette use has completely taken off since they came on the market in 2011. We've seen a spike most recently in 2017, and that was a lot of the products like Juul, Puff Bar. That's kind of when those products were really taking off. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why those products in particular we've seen an increase. So as you all probably know, there's been a very changing landscape when it comes to e-cigarettes and vape devices, right? So they started out kind of looking a little bit like cigarettes. Now, honestly, I don't even try to keep up with the trends. Like, I know how the basic mechanics of a vape or e-cigarette device works, but they're constantly changing. Oftentimes they're made to look, oh, I forgot I was gonna bring my talk box. Did I say that? I'm sorry. It's been a day, y'all, let me tell you. But the point is that it's very difficult to recognize these products, and they're made that way, right? That's one of the ways that they're marketed to young people. They're very easy to hide. They can be very discreetly used. They're made to look really cool and different and not look like our old school cigarettes that we grew up with. So even though e-cigarettes come in all different shapes and sizes, they basically all work the same. So if you don't know, all of the devices have these elements. So they have a place where the e-liquid or vape juice is held. They have a heating coil or device that heats up that e-liquid into an aerosol. There's a battery that controls that process. So all of those things exist in all of the different vapes, but kind of the mechanics of them can be different, right? Okay, so I have a quiz question for y'all. All of these are possible ingredients in vape juice, right? Like we talked about how e-cigarettes are made. There's always this like liquid called vape juice or e-liquid that is heated up and allows the person to then inhale it. All of these are possible ingredients in vape juice except what? So nicotine, propylene glycol, CBD, water vapor, or flavors. Which one is not possibly an ingredient? Yes, water vapor. Which is kind of funny, right? Because it's called vaping. And the industry created this word and to promote it so that we would connect it with the word water vapor, right? And feel like it was safe. And I remember, I'm gonna tell you a story about myself. So I started smoking when I was very young. I come from a family that smokes and uses tobacco products. It was very normalized in my life. And after I quit smoking, it was right around when vaping was taking off and e-cigarettes. And I was drawn in. There was like a free sample station and they're like, it's just water vapor and flavors, it's harmless. And this is still being sold, right, to young people, that it's just water vapor. But in reality, all of these things could be in e-cigarettes or e-liquid, but water vapor is definitely not one of them. So I refer to the stuff that comes out of e-cigarette devices as aerosol and not vapor, because it's really not vapor.
Before you go on that last slide, can you break down what some of those ingredients are and what they do?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. I was going to get to this question
Okay,
real
well,
quick, but
we can
actually,
wait.
let me do this first because I think that will flow better now that I think about it. Okay, so let's talk about what these ingredients are. So nicotine, y'all know what nicotine is, right? It's the stuff that occurs in a tobacco plant and many other plants, but it is a highly addictive chemical, and it's what makes tobacco products addictive. Propylene glycol is something that is added to e-liquids because it's a chemical that helps turn the liquid into an aerosol when heated. There are other things that can also help with that process. CBD is a part of the cannabis plant. It is currently legal in North Carolina. It is considered non-psychoactive, which means that if you use it, you don't get high from it, but it's also very unregulated, right? And so if you're purchasing a product that contains CBD, oftentimes you don't really know the quality of the CBD, if it actually is CBD, but it is a possible ingredient in e-liquid or vape products. And then flavors. So if you've ever seen vape shops or online vape shops, you know that there are thousands of flavors, that candy flavors, fruit flavors, mocha cinnamon chocolate swirl. I mean, it's like an ice cream shop gone wild, right? So all of these flavors are added as part of the e-liquid to improve the feel and the experience of inhaling this aerosol, and to make it really appealing to young people. Okay, did that help kind of go over all of this? So, thinking about all of these ingredients that we just went over, are these ingredients FDA approved? What do you think? Yes or no? Say yes or no.
No.
You think they're not FDA
I
approved?
think they are.
Who says they
I
are?
think they are, but just not, well, I think they are.
Yeah, well, you are correct. All of them, and this is another thing when I was at, before I got into tobacco, newly quit smoking, talking to the guy at this vaping table with all the flavors, he's like, these are all FDA approved as generally considered safe. It's called the GRAS rule, generally recognized as safe, right? So all of them are FDA approved as food additives, right? But the problem is food additives are not the same as in heating something up and inhaling it, right? So I can consume sugar, for example, but for any of you chemistry folks out there, if you actually heat sugar up, right, until it becomes inhalable, it's toxic, right? Another example of that, if y'all remember back, I don't remember when this was, the popcorn lung scare with diacetyl, which is a chemical added to microwave popcorn, perfectly safe to eat on your microwave popcorn, but when it's heated up and inhaled, it is incredibly toxic to your lungs, right? So when we say that something's FDA approved, it's important to know, and it's important that young people know, what is it approved for, right? Because I can't eat my lotion and feel like that's safe, but it's FDA approved to put on my skin, right? I can eat this food, but I can't heat it and inhale it and put it in my lungs. So it's important that we remember what's being sold and what's being said and the way that things are framed, and to be really savvy about this. And I say this to y'all because this is how I present it to young people, right? I want them to understand how they're being manipulated, because I found that that's one of the best ways to get them to really think about this differently and to be empowered to say, like, wow, I don't want to be manipulated. Okay, so what's actually in this aerosol besides some of the chemicals that we talked about? So when that heating coil heats up really hot to turn that liquid into an aerosol, what happens is that tiny flecks of that metal actually end up coming off the coil and it also get in that aerosol, right? And so in addition to having the chemicals that are already in the e-liquid, we also have tiny bits of heavy metals coming off of those coils and getting into the aerosol and then getting into your lungs as well, which is not good for our lungs. So we've probably seen a lot of the headlines about how e-cigarettes have kind of taken over young people and how they seem to be like really scarily addicted, right, to e-cigarettes in a way that maybe we haven't seen with traditional or combustible cigarettes, the old school kind. So one of the reasons why, and it started with Juul and has continued with Puff Bar and Soren and all the new products that we've seen on the market, and why we've seen a jump in the young people, not only that are using e-cigarettes, but that are addicted, is because the nicotine in e-cigarettes is not the free-base nicotine that exists in a tobacco plant. I don't want to get like too chemical, but for science nerds, maybe y'all will get excited about this. When you take free-base nicotine and you add, and actually free-base nicotine is really difficult to inhale, right? It's very basic and it's very harsh on the lungs. And so there is a limit to the amount of nicotine that you can put in a product, in a cigarette, in an e-cigarette that uses free-base nicotine, without it becoming very unpleasant, right? It kind of has a natural cap. And the tobacco companies figured that out long ago with traditional conventional cigarettes. with the invention of nicotine salts, which is when you add an acid to the nicotine to make it more neutral, and it's much more palatable and much higher levels. So what that means is that these products, again, starting with Juul really was the one that brought this to the market, this new idea of nicotine salts. You can have much higher levels of nicotine inhaled into the lung without it being an unpleasant or harsh feeling experience. And so it's because of that that we're seeing higher levels of addiction with these new generation e-cigarettes than we've seen previously. Okay, so what age, our brains are developing until what age? 25, right, okay. Sometimes, for some folks it's like 30, I don't know, maybe 40. So the important part about that is that when you introduce, well, you all probably already know this, 9 out of 10 cigarette smokers start before the age of 18, and 95% start before the age of 21. I've met very few people in my life, if any, who actually just pick up smoking, you know, like in their 20s or 30s or 40s. It just doesn't happen, right? And there's a reason for that, right? When you're young and you're eager to try new things and your brain hasn't fully developed, you are more impulsive and you're gonna take chances and you're gonna be really curious. And we see this with teenagers. You're not gonna think about the consequences, right? But we also know that nicotine has a really big effect on that developing brain, right? And so we've seen that when you add something as addictive as nicotine to a brain that has not fully developed, that it changes the development of that brain, making it more susceptible to future addictions to other drugs. I'm not a big fan of the term gateway drug, but I do think that if a person uses an addictive substance at a young age, and it changes the way that their brain develops, if they then try future addictive substances in the future, then that brain is going to be more susceptible to enjoying that drug, to feeling good, and to being addicted to it. It also increases the risk for mood disorders and impulsivity, because oftentimes what we see with an addictive drug like nicotine is that you have created this cycle of feeding your craving and then going into withdrawal, and then feeding your craving and then going into withdrawal. And that's a cycle that happens many times throughout the day for anyone who uses a tobacco product. I remember experiencing it myself. You know you can only go for so long without a cigarette or without a puff on your Juul when you start feeling antsy, right? And so that increases some of these teenage behaviors that we already see happening. So I'd like to talk to folks a lot about marketing. Tobacco companies, and most vape products and e-cigarette products are owned by big tobacco companies at this point, right? And they have a playbook that they've used for generations about how to target and sell to youth and be really sneaky about it. So oftentimes the strategies now that are being used are vape shops being located close to where young people might be or hang out, having vape products listed with other sort of innocuous things, harmless things like beverages and milk, all ages. I mean, it's a subtle thing, but all of these things add up in a young person's mind to make them feel like, well, it can't be that bad. So this is the other thing that has really got me, because I don't know if you all watch Netflix as much as I do, but I used to smoke, and I get triggered sometimes because I've been watching, and there is a lot more tobacco use in streaming shows now than what I remember from a couple of years ago. And this is something that I now realize is a tobacco industry tactic. They're doing this. They're placing more products, tobacco products, smoking, vaping in shows that teenagers will want to watch or that already are watching, again, to normalize it, to make it look cool, just like back in the day, seeing the commercials that I grew up seeing, right, for Virginia Slims or whatever else it was. But like, it's a very subtle way of reintroducing tobacco products into the youth market. And then there's all of these ads, and like, this is the one that really gets me, because they're like holding these carrots and these rhubarb sticks, and it says switch to alt, right? So I always present young people with these types of advertising so that they think about like, what's happening here? I mean, because you're actually comparing an e-cigarette to a vegetable, which, regardless of how you feel about how dangerous or not dangerous vape products are, they're definitely not vegetables, you know? So I think it's important to let young folks know how they're being manipulated, and that's a big part of the conversation that I like to have about vaping. Does anybody know what the #1 way to reduce youth tobacco use in a community is? In a community, #1 way to reduce tobacco use. It's a very simple thing.
Communication.
Huh?
Communication.
Communication? That's kind of like a
Education.
more one-on-one thing, so that could take some time.
Raise the price of the product.
Yes. Yes, you raise the price of the product. So raising the price of the product is the #1 way to, across the board, reduce, and we saw this with cigarettes, because young people just don't have disposable income. It's very easy to price young people out of the market, but we've seen the opposite with vape products. They've gone from being very expensive to being extremely cheap, right? And so this is another way in which young people can have access to these products, is by making them cheap. Now, obviously, we, right here, because this is a state legal issue, policy issue that we at the state are working on, cannot raise the price of these products. So in the meantime, how do we here prevent young people from using tobacco? And I have a couple of ideas here, but I feel like y'all are, I don't know, you seem like a pretty knowledgeable group about this, so maybe you can add some. One of the things I always used to say when I worked in drug and alcohol education with college students and parents was like, #1 thing you can do for your kids when it comes to drugs and alcohol is set a good example. You know, the do as I say, not as I do didn't work. It didn't work when my mom said it to me about smoking. So if you can, please set a good example. And then always talk about things. Staying connected with a young person in your life and talking about not necessarily like the scary dangers or, you know, lectury way, but like how the tobacco companies manipulate people, and how corporations, their interest ultimately is in making profits in their bottom line and not in helping you or taking care of you. And so letting young folks know about that, asking them about their experience and what they know. I learn a lot from the young people in my life about these products and about what they know about it and what they see. So continually like checking in and asking open-ended questions about like, what are you seeing in your school? What do you know about these products? What are you hearing? Making sure that young people know how nicotine harms the developing brain. And again, I try to do this in like a non-judgy, lectury way. And ultimately letting young people know that like the decision is up to you. Like your brain hasn't fully developed, you know, and that's a little bit harder when you're a parent, I understand. I also think that like keeping that connection with your kid and letting them know like this is what I expect of you, is also important in that parental role, right? Of just like, this is what I expect of you, this is not acceptable. And I think it's important to have like a heart-to-heart conversations where we can kind of explore what kids are going through and what they're facing, right? And what they're struggling with. Oh, and keep it honest. So one of the things that I struggle with sometimes, like in talking to young people, is that I used to use tobacco. I used to smoke a pack a day, you know, and it's like, well, I'm fine now, like, look at me. But that's not true for most of my family members. And so it's hard, like, I have to keep it honest with people about my experience, right? And I want to make sure that I don't glamorize the struggle that I went through to quit, the lasting impacts that I still have, and even just glamorizing the use of it, right? And the fact that I still struggle 10 years later. I see it on TV, and sometimes I still want one. It is important to be honest with young people about our own experimentation, our own past use, or even current use, but making sure that we're not glamorizing it. And I feel like this is more true for drugs and alcohol. With parents sometimes, or like adults inadvertently like talking about like when they were in college and like, oh my gosh, that one night where I got so drunk. Yeah, but anyway, I feel like it's still important to cover that part. Yeah.
Quick question. You mentioned that you're a pack-a-day smoker. What's the equivalent of vaping? Is there what would be equivalent in vaping to a pack-a-day smoker?
Yeah, that's a great question that I don't know that anyone can answer, because I mean, we used to say that like a jewel pod equaled a pack, but the problem is the nicotine salts complicates it, because they're getting a higher level of nicotine than I probably would have gotten from my pack a day, because they're able, when it's a nicotine salt, you're able to inhale more of it comfortably. So except for the jewel pod, one jewel pod is approximately one pack of cigarettes, or one disposable puff bar, I would say is probably more. I think it's a complicated answer. Most of the current e-cigarette products on the market, I would guess would be equivalent to a little bit more than a pack, depending on how the user is using it. What we know about most people that use tobacco is that they kind of self-regulate their nicotine level. So what that means is, like I had switched to ultralights at one point, but when I did a CO monitor test where they test the carbon monoxide in your lungs, it was just as high as it was before, because I was regulating. I was pulling in more nicotine to reach my optimum level, right? So even like when we see people like cut down, they'll do like a deeper inhale. So e-cigarettes make it very hard to measure these things, and I'm sorry that I don't have a more complete answer than that. So these are just some key points in talking to young folks, and it's probably a lot of stuff that you already know. Oftentimes, the way that e-cigarettes or vape products are sold are that it is less harmful than smoking, right? And there's very few things in this world that are as damaging to your body as smoking a cigarette, because it damages every part of your body. Most people who smoke will end up dying of it if they don't quit. And so saying that something is safer than smoking is not really saying much, right? We also don't really know the full extent to which e-cigarette products harm our lungs. Yeah, so we have studies with petri dishes, with lung tissue, where we have exposed it and tried to mimic what a lung cell would go through when it is exposed to vape aerosol, and it shows signs of cancerous growth, and it shows irritation and all the things that we might expect it to show when you introduce an aerosol into your lungs. But we won't know in humans until probably 10, 20, 30 years from now what the actual real impact long-term is, because we don't have those studies, right? We have to look, we have to look at what the lungs in a human would do after years and years of vaping, and so we just don't know. And a couple of other things that we've already talked about. Tobacco companies want young people to think vaping is harmless, because if they can get a customer in their youth to try their product that is highly addictive, they possibly have a customer for life. It is a brilliant business plan. Cannot fault them for that. But ultimately, do you want to have that, sign up for that for the rest of your life? And then also, the good example, setting a good example, asking, talking about it. You know, young folks can think of it as nagging, but it is love, and I promise they will come back and appreciate it, because, you know, it is out of love, right? And so continuing to check in, and y'all already know this, I can see a lot of nodding. Anything else that you all would add as far as like talking to young people, things that you find is helpful?
I'm wondering, when you talk about the brain and it being like it's primed, right? When we use our muscles and we get a runner, like they call it the runner's high, muscles remember. And think of the brain as the gateway to those muscles. So when you send this chemical up to your brain, it's driving that engine to your muscles. So then your muscles remember what that feeling looked like, and then kids are going to want to replicate that really feel-good feeling. And I think if you present it in that way, then they'll be able to kind of relate to that because they know that. Where that's what I'm just wondering, as far as like when you're talking to kids, let them know that we know that you're, and then being able to talk about that conversation, having a discussion with them about what alternative ways can you get that feeling in another way besides vaping. And then that, I think that's where you're going to get that heart-to-heart talk about what makes them feel good, what's happening to them now, why do they have to go to, you know, the e-vapes to get that feeling again, what's missing in their life. So that's something to kind of consider when you're talking with your kids. That's what my takeaway from this.
I love that. I love the muscle memory thing. I think that is a really helpful metaphor. And I also think, you know, the irony is lots of times folks are sort of driven to use a tobacco product or vape or smoke because of stress. And ultimately, being addicted to something causes a lot more stress, and especially something like nicotine. Using a nicotine-containing product is associated with increased levels of stress, increased levels of depression, and increased levels of anxiety, especially in young people. And so making sure that young folks know that ultimately, I think what's sold to them, and this comes through the streaming and the social media and the video games, is that this is something that you do to relieve stress or to calm down. And that may be true the first or second or third time because it does introduce pleasurable chemicals in your brain. But once you activate that nicotine addiction cycle, you've now added a whole nother layer of stress onto your life of this daily in and out of withdrawal feeling that you have to deal with now. Oh, and I didn't talk about this when we were talking about the higher levels of nicotine and nicotine salts. But one of the things that is helpful in treating young people who are addicted and are wanting to stop using e-cigarettes or vapes is using nicotine replacement therapy. And this is something that for a long time, you know, health professionals weren't sure because it's a product that's 18 and up right now. So nicotine patches, gum, and lozenges is what I'm talking about. And but now the American Association of Pediatrics and a host of other young or health profession associations have said that due to the high levels of nicotine in these products, it is very helpful for a young person to have access to nicotine replacement therapy to help them treat their withdrawal symptoms. Because ultimately, what they get from a nicotine patch or gum or lozenge is not going to equal what they get from a vape device or e-cigarette, nicotine-wise, and it comes without all the harmful crap in your lungs. So it is now recommended for young people, especially given the high levels of nicotine that we're seeing in these new vape products. Okay, so now I want to talk about what we have available for young people. This is a specific program that is for young people who are struggling with vaping or e-cigarettes. It is a text-based program for teens age 13 to 17, and they have access to their quick coach via text. They can do all kinds of self-tests. There is different goals that they can set for themselves. And so this is a program that is new in North Carolina, and I encourage all young folks who are struggling with e-cigarettes and who are interested in quitting to check it out. I have the cards over here that I left with Rob. Oh, and that was it. Wow. Do y'all have any other questions before I answer this part? Or ask you your last question?
Yeah, let's go back to Juul. You said e-cigarettes took off in 2011, and at that time they were known as e-cigarettes, and then Juul seems to have come on site in 2015.
Yep, 2015. Yep.
What made them take up so much of the market share? Is their dosage higher than other e-cigarettes? You mentioned marketing. Was that a big part of it? Why are they the dominant player right now? Or
They're not the dominant player anymore, but they immediately took off because of nicotine salts. So nicotine salts plus marketing. I mean, it was a sleek, cool-looking device. But I also believe the nicotine salts played a huge role in that because that was the new development that they introduced into the e-cigarette market. Before then, products contained the free-base nicotine that was much harsher, that you had to have at lower levels, otherwise it would be unpleasant to inhale. And I've experienced this. I've never tried Juul because, gosh knows, I would probably, that would be it for me. But having tried some of the older school, generation products, it was a harsh inhale, right? That free-base nicotine is unpleasant, but Juul was the first product on the market to introduce the nicotine salts, and they took off because it's much more addictive. And then since then, other products have kind of taken a page out of Juul's book and continued that on, and so that's how they've all been able to rise to the top so quickly. Good question.
Going back to the delivery system, you mentioned the juice packs and the cigarettes itself. Mm-hmm. The delivery device, those are made for the most part overseas in China, but the juice packs are I guess they're made here in the U.S.?
I mean, I guess it depends on the company. So yes, I think so, but I'm not entirely sure. They're not regulated, right? So that the e-cigarette market is right now just going through the FDA review that is now required of them for them to continue to sell their products, and the FDA has been backlogged for the last 2 years reviewing these pre-market applications, right? So maybe once we have that information, I mean, but the reality is a lot is not known about what's in these products, except for that they are usually using ingredients that are FDA approved as food additives and safe for food. But I don't know where they're generally made.
Do you have any knowledge or information on the cartridges or the whatever you want to call them that they're putting other things in? Like someone off the street is putting harmful chemicals in, they're adding THC, we know that we've heard from kids. Can you give any information on data, statistics, what you've encountered with that?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely a huge market beyond nicotine-containing products. And I don't necessarily have statistics on that because of the way that my job is funded. I only do tobacco, so I don't do any education on other drugs. But what I can say is that, again, because none of these products are really regulated at this point, and we don't have any true information on what they contain, it really could be anything. I mean, unless you're buying it from one of the big vape companies, right, like the Juuls or the, but even then, I don't know that we can really trust it because they're all still going through their FDA review. So as far as other drugs, yes, vapes can contain any amount of any of these other substances. I will say though, and thinking like a drug dealer, which I do sometimes, would I necessarily want to put, you know, a more expensive drug or something in, you know, like fentanyl or even THC in a product and give it to a kid who may or may not be able to afford to have it? I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't. But the reality is that there are some people out there that are putting, I'm sure that you all heard about the Natalie situation, where the e-cigarettes were containing vitamin E oil, which was a cheaper alternative to like the propylene glycol or other things that can help create that aerosol from a liquid. That was mostly in THC products that were ordered online from a couple of shops. So yes, there are definitely folks who may be adding additives to try to cut costs, and we don't know what those additives can do. So I mean, yeah. But as far as adding drugs, I don't have a lot of information about that, and I would be suspect about that too, if it's a very young person, because I don't know that a dealer would want to part with a, like, I don't know.
But then there's so much information out there on the internet that kids have access to that they could tinker with it on themselves.
That's
And
true. They
That's,
can order
and that's,
it. Yeah.
you know, what's
That's
sad
what I think
about
we're
this whole
probably
thing.
talking
I
about.
think that's what we're hearing kids talk about here in school. That's what's going on.
I mean,
So
there's
they
so
go
many
online and
tutorials,
then-
things that they have access to, and we need to have conversations as parents and as a society with these kids because they're reaching out for these things. And I wonder if they're reaching out for these things to depress some of these bigger feelings that they don't know how to manage.
Yeah. I think that that's huge.
And that's why it's going to the lower kids, right?
So as far as the other drug piece, and again, this is kind of getting into like outside of my current scope, but that's definite. Like if a kid is trying to actually get high on something and they're ordering something online, then that definitely probably speaks to a deeper mental health issue. And I think another thing that I've seen in the cannabis industry is a huge shift with legalization in young people believing that it is harmless. And it is an unfortunate thing, especially for young folks, regardless of how you feel about the cannabis plant, because we know that it is not good for a developing brain to introduce that product. But young people tend to think that it's harmless as well.
Natalie, you've been doing this for a while. Can you share some stories of what young people say? Because you do presentations to young people. What do they say to you after you do the presentation? Do they come up and talk to you? Do they share their stories? Can you share some of the good stories and maybe even some of the bad stories?
Well, I will say that I occasionally do presentations with young people, but it's not a real regular thing. But I will say that I do a different presentation with young folks than I did with y'all. I don't talk about the products. I ask them about the products, and that's where I learn. I talk to them about the advertising. And I talk to them about how they're being manipulated because tobacco companies think that they're dumb, but I don't think they're dumb. And so that really gets them excited. They do come up and talk to me about that. They do tell me like, wow, I saw that like this influencer on Instagram or this person on TikTok who's like competing about who has the biggest vape cloud and like, look at this, like, you know, and I encourage them to continue looking at those things like with a critical eye. And I've seen a lot of young folks like with heartbreaking addiction. I was working an event in Burlington, not last weekend, but the weekend before, and I talked to a lot of young people at that event who were really struggling with vaping, and they wanted to quit because they felt like it was an extension of their hand. I mean, they were just so addicted. And a lot of times they feel like they can't quit. And we know that it's harder when you are a teenager to quit than it is for an adult, again, because of the developing brain situation. So my heart goes out to them. And I think letting them know that I'm not going to quit on them. I don't want them to quit on themselves. And what I say to all the people that used to come to my class when I did classes before was, don't quit on quitting. No matter what it is that you're working on, don't quit on quitting, because every time you make an attempt, you're going to learn something new about yourself, about your relationship to this product, and use that in the future. But I think also, I don't know, I love seeing young people get aware of the media, the targeting, helping them to use those skills, not just for vaping, but for other things as well. I mean, this is critical thinking, right? Like being able to look at something and not just take it at face value because so-and-so cool kid on TikTok said that it was, whatever. I mean, anyway, I'm starting to trip over my words here, but did that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
The only other question I had was with that texting program that you showed, what has been this, how new is it and what's the success rate with using that type of avenue?
I don't know the success rate offhand. It is pretty new. It launched this past summer. And yeah, I don't know the success rate. I think we're still trying to figure that out. What I know is that it came out of years of studying young people and like different curriculums that have been used in schools and prevention programs. So I think that there is a lot of science behind it. And so I mean, we're all pretty hopeful for it. I think,
And the concept is just texting?
yeah. And if a young person does want more than that, then they can contact the Quit Line, the North Carolina Quit Line, which is the free telephone counseling service that's available to any North Carolina resident who uses any type of tobacco product. And they can talk to a quit coach on the phone if that's something that they would want to do, in addition or instead of the text-based program. The text-based program was for young people because they seem to prefer that in the studies that were done prior to launching this program.
Are you talking about texting?
Texting.
Okay.
Yeah, like texting on your phone.
I guess that was my question, is like, what is the progression? Like, you're reaching them where they are,
Yeah.
because that's where they are, is texting, and this is how I can manipulate my emotions at this point. But then what's the next step? I'm curious, as this goes on and it's been launched, what's the next step to progress them to go on further and actually have other alternatives to deal with those emotions outside of these addictive habits?
Well, part of the quit coach process with the Quit Line is identifying those things, right? And so, like going through, what makes you vape or what drives you to do this, right? So the first question that I used to ask folks when I was doing tobacco treatment is, what do you like about smoking? What do you like about vaping? What is it giving to you? And sometimes people have a really hard time answering that question, but answering that question is really key to getting to the heart of what are those emotions that are coming up that you're trying to deal with or not deal with. And how can we find other ways to deal with that? And so I know that the Quit Line goes through that process with each person that calls or texts, because that's such a big part. I mean, the Live 8-3 program is a program to get you to quit, to set a quit date, to work through the steps of building a support system, identifying the emotions that may be coming up for you, and figuring out what are some other ways that we can deal with those things. What are some ways that we can deal with like the rush of a craving in a moment? What are some long-term ways of managing stress? All of those things are things that are part of the Quit Line experience.
What's the average number of times someone has to try to quit smoking for success?
Well, with smoking, it can take, for the average person, it's 7 to 10 attempts. For people with behavioral health conditions, so that would be depression, anxiety, PTSD, substance use disorder, it can be up to 30 attempts. And again, I cannot recommend enough the use of nicotine replacement therapy, if that is an option for somebody, a young person or not, in helping to ease through that transition and being tobacco free. All right, how confident do y'all feel now?
Eight.
Yeah.
8. Okay, I like that. All right. Oops. There's my contact info. Again, if you all want to follow up with me, please do. Email is usually the best. But if you have any questions or need more supplies or resources or information, then definitely, or questions come up. Thank you all
Thank you.
for your time.